please help me in welcoming Dropbox's very own software engineer, my guy, Jose Rodriguez Salinas, to the stage, all right?
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Perfect, perfect. Well, welcome. If you're coming from lunch, hope you had a good one. I also want to welcome, if anyone, this is your first time coming to Render, welcome. And if it's your second time, welcome back. Personally, it is my first time coming to Render, and I couldn't be more happier than actually getting to know the community and be part of this. And I really just love the atmosphere so far, and I feel welcome in this beautiful, beautiful city. Yeah. So today, I want to tell you a little bit about a journey that I call the hidden curriculum of a software engineer. To start this conversation, I'm going to be breaking it down into 3 sections. First, I want to ground up our common ground. First, I want to tell you a little bit about the common paths of a software developer. I'll tell you a little bit about the transitions and how you would typically move between level 1, level 2, and senior levels. And ultimately, which is my subject of interest today, is talking about the hidden curriculum. All the things that you get to pick up along the way, but no one ever tells you about them when you start going to school or boot camps or any program. But before I start this conversation, I want to give you some context of who I am and how did I get interested in this. So a little bit about myself. I've been a developer for almost 9 years already. I am originally from Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico. Yeah. And if you put these ingredients together, you get a Mexican octocut, which is me. And if I told you how I actually started with software, in fact, I actually started with hardware. It was back in Mexico when I was taking a 7th grade course. I was learning how to be the trade of an electrician. I did things like fixing outlets, doing the electrical wiring of houses, and also I broke my mom's washer in the name of my education. So if you're watching this, Mom, thank you so much for this. And also, as you might imagine, you have a bunch of 13-year-old kids dealing with electricity, so we burned a bunch of outlets along the way. So that was fun. But if I'll tell you like how my journey has been since college up until now, I like this image by Martin Kleppmann from the book Designing Data-Intensive Applications, because I feel like my journey across these different institutions has all been very data-driven for the most part. From the moment I got a research position at UCLA doing data mining with Dr. Alfonso Cárdenas, up until this point at Dropbox, where I get to work with storing metadata from our users at the petabyte scale. And everything in between has been working, ingesting data and building web applications, either dealing with enterprise data or dealing with astronomy data when I was working at JPL. But the question is, did I actually feel ready when I was working at these places? And to be honest, I actually felt like Ash Ketchum from Pallet Town. I felt like, like I know C++, I'm good to go, I can take down the world. It's my sophomore year in college, I'm good to go, But then I talked to my research professor, Alfonso Cárdenas, who kind of like told me, C++, which is a good thing, but you still have a long way and many things to learn. So he still took me under his wing, and he said, I'm gonna let you work with me as a researcher. You're gonna learn some Python, but I want you to finish your degree so you feel more ready to go. So I'm like, okay, I'll continue. So I carry on. I finished my degree, took all my courses, took operating system, databases, you name it, all the typical computer science curriculum, which it boils down to coding. I essentially work on how to be an effective coder. But then, when I took my first internship, or even when I took my first job right after college, I felt like a fraud, because I felt like there was like a bunch of terms getting thrown at me, things like design docs, postmortems, on-call stuff, a bunch of things that I felt like, well, did I miss class? Did I pick the wrong degree? Or what exactly happened in my career? But it gets better. I started looking into different roles and how a software engineer looks at different companies. And if you look at a couple of companies, for example, like Dropbox has 7 levels on how to become an engineer. Microsoft has 13. Google has about 8. And Facebook has about 7. So it's not too crazy to feel like you're losing your mind, because you switch companies and you feel like everything kind of resets and the levels look a little different. So it feels a little confusing. But the best way I actually like to put it, I feel like when you go down the road and you start looking for jobs, I usually tell people that it feels like a freeway. You're happy, you're driving, and you feel like, oh, okay, I am making progress, I'm gonna get my first job. You switch lanes, this could be because you're getting your first job, or you're switching jobs and you feel like you just hit a traffic jam and things are getting a little loony along the way. But I propose something. Someone who grew up in the era of cartridges, someone who loved Super Nintendo a lot when I was young, I feel like, I like to think of jobs almost like a bunch of cartridges that you get to play with, and you get to kind of like play with different games along the way. And what do all games have in common? It's a gaming console. And if you look at different games, they'll have their own rules, handbooks, and ways that you're supposed to navigate the company in order to be successful. So just to highlight a couple of examples, I put here. So I have, for example, the Netflix memo that kind of shows you how the culture looks at Netflix, and it kind of gives you like a breakdown of what to expect if you join the company. Another example of how these handbooks look for different companies is, for example, the Spotify framework that tells you like how you are expected to grow in the company and how you're going to be moving up the ladder. And even recently, Dropbox, we also released our career framework that you can find as well online, where you can see like how the 7 levels look for a software engineer, and you can also see like what are the expectations in order to move up the ladder. So I also want to show you a couple of job postings. I want to show you a couple of them from different companies that I kind of picked randomly from like Airbnb, Netflix, Spotify, Dropbox, and I want you to like look at this with me. So if you look at all the different roles, they'll have slight variations of language, and even you go to LinkedIn at some of these companies' websites, they're gonna have different expectations about software developers. It seems like they have different language. They seem a little different from one another, but after you start looking at a few of them, you start noticing patterns. And these patterns is what I call the hidden agenda. So to highlight some things here, so everything that you see in red is all technical language. So things like large infrastructure, dealing with UIs, learning about best practices, using libraries. Everything that you see in blue is what I call like execution steps. So things like dealing with ambiguity, how to multitask, how to get things done. And everything in purple is what I call product. So things like business impact, or defining short and long-term goals in order to keep the business up and running. Now, if we go back to the Venn diagram that I had shown you earlier, now if we look at all those patterns that I just showed you, we could boil down everything in red, all the different things that I was getting thrown at the beginning of my career, and I want to boil it down into actually a more manageable list that all of you can look at as you start navigating your path as an engineer. So I like to think of it that you don't need just coding, you also need project, product, and people management, or stakeholder management, just essentially how to deal with people. So what is the trick? Like, how do you master this hidden curriculum? How do you go beyond the coding piece? And I think everyone in this room already has the leverage to do so. I feel confident that everyone in this room, especially if you came to RenderATL, you're taking workshops, you're already like learning a lot of things about technology, and you're growing your curriculum all the time. So I want you to think of your leverage as the following. And I like this definition by Edmond Lau from the book, The Effective Engineer. And the way he defines it as impact over time. So he says that if you want to have leverage, you want to work in the most impactful thing in the least possible time. And what is the leverage that all of you have in this room? The one that you have is your toolkit. Just like any video game that you have controller, like a stopper gun, in the case of any person or technical person, is all the knowledge that you carry with you from taking boot camps, from going to college, from being a self-taught coder. And today, I'm not going to be diving into the details of this because that's why we have workshops and different talks here where they're going to be talking about here RenderATL. But I just want to give an example of how that looks for me. So for me, working mostly on the back end for Dropbox at the moment, it's like things like system performance, Linux internal tools, and dealing with data infrastructure. So at the moment, it might seem that you're going in an uphill battle. Perhaps because you feel like you only know coding, or maybe you don't have the rest of the other milestones that I just mentioned. But I want you to think that just by having the tooling piece, the toolkit with you, you already have a huge leverage among many things. The only thing that is remaining is crossing the chasm. And I like this definition of the chasm. It's actually got it from the definition from the world of business, where it talks about product adoption. But I like the diagram because I feel it helps highlight the chasm that all engineers have to go through. It's going from essentially knowing the coding piece and jumping into all the non-coding pieces that you're supposed to learn along the way. So to kind of like land these ideas, let's look at all the job levels. And to make it a little more simpler, I want you to think of job levels in 3 categories. Think of them as the entry level, the mid-senior level, and think about the upper senior levels. So typically when you're in the entry level, you're doing 2 things. You're doing coding, execution. So your manager tells you, build me a UI component, you get it done, you test it, it's resilient, and you deliver it on time. And you get so well at this, you start delivering more value, and your manager starts to trust you even more. You get more complex tasks, even more risky tasks, and you get it done on time. And eventually, you're going to hit the wall where your manager or your superior, they're like, okay, now you're really good at delivering value and delivering the code. Now we want you to trust you to deliver an entire project. And this is where you cross the chasm. The chasm is composed of the product and the stakeholders. And product is essentially thinking about, we're gonna get the coding done, but also like, what is the thing that we're building? How many tasks is gonna take to get it done? And also you're thinking about the sequencing of those things. You're thinking about in which order those tasks need to be accomplished. How many endpoints we need? How many UI components we're gonna need? How are we gonna stick them together? Who's gonna combine those components together? The other piece is also thinking about which teams are we gonna have to interface with. Do we need to talk to legal, the privacy team, accessibility? Are there any risks that we should talk to other teams? So you gotta do that coordination as well. The other thing, which is one of the most crucial ones, is thinking about like the post-releases, thinking about, well, we plan it, we have all the tasks, it's good to go, so how are we gonna release it? Do we have to take any mitigation in order to reduce risk? Should we talk to communications to communicate anything about the product? Should we talk to some lawyers or something? And ultimately, is the piece about keeping an ear in the ground. It's not just getting the work done, but it's also thinking what is coming up in the next 6 months down the road, thinking about the next set of products. And I keep emphasizing this middle region, and the reason is because this one is pretty much the main loop that you gotta master, because once you start going, if you wanna go to step and beyond, essentially if you master this middle set of skills, you're gonna be doing this at a much larger scale by the time you reach step and beyond. So you're probably thinking, Jose, this is daunting, in some ways contradicting. I thought coding was enough to be a successful engineer. It is. Coding is the essential piece how you get started. But I like to think of it as a summation. I like to think of it as a summation of stakeholders, the product piece, the execution, and also the coding piece. And the mnemonic that I actually like to mention is the mnemonic of spec. And spec, I think, is a very handy one that you can apply in your day-to-day in order to get projects done. So to walk you through an example, we could think of them as design docs. So I'm sure, or for many of you who have never heard of the term design doc, so when you start working for companies, a design doc is essentially the definition of how the project is going to be accomplished. It delineates essentially like the introduction, how the project came about, the goals of the project, the non-goals, what's not going to get done, the solutions, like all the code that we're going to be writing. Also, we have the consideration, like what teams we got to talk to in order to release this successfully, and also the metrics. How are we going to measure that the project was good and it's going to be able to reach the customers, and also we're going to know that we made the right calls. And usually, all of us, when we all start at the entry level, we all start with solutions. We start jumping into existing projects that are already on the flight, and you're helping build data models like table schemas. You're building presentation layers like mobile applications or web applications, and you're building them successfully so they have no failure modes. So if we connect this with the framework that I just mentioned, it's all here. It's all connected here. Because all the coding that we all have learned through our trainings is all the solutions that we start contributing to in our teams. And then once you start reaching those mid-senior levels, then you start working with your manager and your leadership team to think about how are you going to propose a new project, what needs to get done, what is feasible, what are going to be the goals, and also what are going to be the non-goals of what we're going to be accomplishing. And like I said earlier, stakeholders is all about people. It's the people that you're going to talk to coordinate and make sure that your release is going to be successful, and you're going to make sure that other teams that you have dependencies with, they're going to deliver what they need for you. And the last piece is the execution, which is like the metrics. Essentially is, like I said earlier, like all the tasks that we're going to do, but also how we're going to measure that all those things got done, and the metrics that we're going to use in order to measure that everything happened correctly. So a couple of examples if you want to look at how design docs look. I like two of them that are very popular. One of them is the Stack Overflow design doc template that you can find online. I like this one because it shows you, I think, one of the most comprehensive templates for design doc, which is really similar to the ones I've seen from the different employers that I had in the past. So I really highly recommend to check this one out. The next one, even for open source, you need some kind of format to deliver and have an impact in the open source community. Even though this is open source, you still gotta come out, write the template, you gotta propose your idea, you gotta tell them what is your rationale behind it, and how this is gonna bring value. So I highly recommend to check this one as well. Technical blocks are also an amazing resource for two reasons. One of them, they tend to be used quite a lot for system design interviews, for getting examples of technical questions that you might get, like how to build an LRU cache and things of that nature. But the other thing that is really useful, I think of them as fragments of the real world. They're not going to show you IP knowledge. They're not going to show you how the secret sauce of companies. But you get to see a glimpse of the big decisions that happen, some of the war battles that they had to go through in order to deliver value. And even if you don't know everything in technical blocks, they're amazing because they start making you wonder and ask questions. Maybe if you don't know MongoDB, MySQL, you're going to be, I see what this is. I'm going to ask a question and follow up and see and find more resources related to this. So I feel like I've been focusing quite a lot on execution, the product, and the code. But what about the people? What about the stakeholders? And even though it might seem like I'm glossing over people in the presentation, it's actually all over the place. It's actually in every step of the way because you have to make coordination with your teams. How many people played Star Fox 64 back in the day? Raise your hands. Thank you for showing my age. Appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. So I like to think of the people as equally as important as it is for games, as it is for impact delivery. If you remember Star Fox, the video game is essentially, you gotta make coordinate attacks, and if one of your teammates doesn't do their job, you could finish the mission, but you're probably gonna lose a lot of health points. But ideally, you don't want that. You want to have you don't want to have careless coordination. You want to make sure that you all coordinate so you don't have any messy projects, or in the case of video games, you don't die or you barely make it across the mission. So I like to think of people as one of the most crucial ingredients in your career, because people, they are the ones who essentially help you get things done. And there's a lot of hidden agenda as well in the people piece. Things like no one ever tells you how to reach out to people through Zoom or through Slack, how to write an email to those people. No one ever tells you that. And it's a skill that you gotta keep polishing and reaching out to people, because it's one of the ways that you ask for help, the way you coordinate how the project's gonna happen. So I like to think of people, and it seems like people tend to be it might feel like a difficult subject, but I like to think of them in four sections. There's the experts, there is peers, opportunities, and what I call the fun. The expert, you could think of them as people in your company who have a lot of the knowledge within the company. They have built several projects already. They built a lot of tools and contributed to your company. And this is the people that you want to be reaching out for help and asking them questions of hey, how do you build a project? Why did you make that decision? Why did we pick this particular technology? And I assure you, more likely than not, they're going to be willing to help you, and they're going to be helping you to answer questions that you have about certain systems. And that's when you start learning a lot. About your peers. This is also an important piece. They're the people you're gonna be running with, you're gonna be delivering value with those people, and it's especially important to start building the skill on how to get to know them. Think about the working style, how do they prefer to communicate with you? Are they the type of people who prefer Slack? Or what about the working hours? Are they night owls? Do they prefer to work in the morning? So that's really important. Just get to know them, not just not just who they are by name, but also how they prefer to communicate with you. The other one, opportunities. This usually comes in the way of teams that you work with on your day-to-day, but maybe not all the time. Maybe you work with them every 3 months, maybe 4 months. But I prefer to talk to those teams before I have something to do, because when you have something to do, you're gonna be stressed out and you'll be more stressed out asking questions and building relationships. So I prefer to actually reach out to them in a more casual fashion. If I know I'm gonna be working with that team, I'd rather reach out to them and just have a coffee chat. Just ask to them, hey, well, how's your day going? Would you like to talk to me? Tell me about your work, what do you do in your team, and get to learn about them. And the last one, that is the fun piece. I think I don't want any of you to think ever that people are just transactional relationships. I think there's also there's the piece of getting work done, but there's also the piece of also building long-standing relationships, because this could be people that you get to network down the road. And a big example of that at Dropbox, the way we have fun, or the way we build other long-standing relationships, is through ERGs, which stands for Employee Resource Groups. We have amazing organizations like Black Boxers. We have Latinx, we have BET, we have Women, and these are places where we get to go and build relationships, and we get to build friends and a community, and a place where we can have a safe haven whenever we're not feeling super well. We could go and reach out to these communities. 2 more thoughts that I want to close by saying related to people or stakeholder management. I want everyone in this room to always aspire to be the type of person who likes to work with different personalities, because you never get to pick who you're gonna work with, but you could also work on being able to work with all kinds of people. Because I think what makes a team amazing and really easy to work with, and also you get a lot of ideas, is by embracing diversity in your team. And one last thought. Some of you might recognize this image is from the Ocarina of Time, from the from the ending of the game. I think of them as I mentioned earlier, is you're gonna switch companies down the road. You're gonna switch teams. You're gonna have different roles, and like I said, they all have different definitions and expectations when it comes to be a software developer. But the one thing that I want all of you to walk away with is all the wins and failures that you're gonna be earning along the way. Because even if you are senior right now and then you become another level in another company, the experience that you have earned along the way, that's gonna be the cushion for you to solve the next set of problems. So always keep that in mind. And with that said, thank you for running this mission with me. Muchas gracias for coming to the presentation. I hope you enjoyed the rest of RenderATL, and thank you for coming today.